At this very hour, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Donald Trump are expected to speak following the commander-in-chief's phone call yesterday with Vladimir Putin. After announcing Putin had agreed to a partial ceasefire, the president claimed conditions are so dire it was important to make a deal, even if it wasn't the one he or Zelensky wanted.
You have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, you know, strange things happen.
I want to bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro to talk more about this. So we keep saying, Aaron, that this is a partial ceasefire. It sounds like what Vladimir Putin is suggesting, which is that Ukraine completely disarm themselves, stop receiving weapons from the United States. Russia will carry on as they've had before, and that's kind of partial. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's actually some developments in the sort of he said game when it comes to that aid from the U.S. to Ukraine. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz told reporters this morning that aid, both in terms of monetary, military aid, was not discussed between President Putin and President Trump yesterday. The Kremlin said last night and this morning that it was discussed. Whether that's a tactic by Russia potentially to cause a wedge between the U.S. and Ukraine remains to be seen. We also heard more a little bit about that call yesterday from U.S. officials this morning, saying that hostage deals in terms of returning hostages of war, as well as more amicable business relationships between the U.S. and Russia was discussed. We also heard from Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to the Middle East that has been instrumental in these negotiations for a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, who said that meeting in person between Trump and President Putin is, quote, likely to happen. Another sign that the White House and this administration is looking to play up the public relationship, at least, between the U.S. and Russia.
And so let's discuss this call that's happening between Trump and Zelensky this morning. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, the call was expected to start around 10 a.m. We heard from Zelensky a good amount since that call between Trump and Putin. Zelensky had agreed to that partial ceasefire, as you mentioned earlier. But given reports of Russian strikes on Ukrainian oil stations and Russia saying that Ukraine struck railways, I'm expecting that to be brought up as well during this call. Zelensky, in general, has said that he needs more details on exactly what was hashed out between Trump and Putin. U.S. officials such as Waltz, as well as Secretary of State Rubio, could potentially be visiting Saudi Arabia to meet with Ukrainian and Russian officials, another sign that they're looking to speed up the negotiations here and get to an end to the fighting.
All right, Aaron Navarro for us this morning at the White House. Thank you, Aaron. Let us bring in Brian Taylor. He is the director of the Moynihan Institute of Global Affairs at the Maxwell School at Syracuse University, and he joins me now to discuss. All right, so this is a partial agreement. We're not talking Treaty of Versailles level here, but is Vladimir Putin being held accountable at all for the actions that he took when he invaded Ukraine?
No, I really don't think so. And I don't think anyone is expecting that to come out of the current round of talks. The most that has been really, floated as an option is some kind of ceasefire, whether in air or at sea. Even what came out of the call yesterday would only be a partial ceasefire in terms of airstrikes. And it looks like that agreement is already not being violated. We know Russia hit some hospitals, which of course is not energy infrastructure, but still, they're a long way away from anything that we would consider a settlement of the Russia-Ukraine war.
And so how would Vladimir Putin sell this? We know that he controls, obviously, or he has a firm grip on the country's media. I'm just trying to think, if he's agreeing to anything, it's because he sees it as a way to spin it favorably for himself. How would he spin what this is, whatever this is?
Well, if you look at what the Kremlin put out based on the phone call between Presidents Trump and Putin yesterday, their characterization of it was much more sober. And it was clear that Putin reiterated his constant talking points about the need to get to what he calls the root causes of the conflict. As far as he's concerned, the basic root cause is that Ukraine wants to pursue a domestic and foreign policy independent of Russian control, and he wants to put an end to that. So when we think of it that way, and then we look at all of the other things that Putin has asked for before an actual ceasefire in terms of limits on military support and intelligence support, recognition of some of the gains they've received on the battlefield, but not achieved politically. It's clear that Putin really hasn't changed his initial position very much at all. It's more he's trying to play ball with Trump, at least in terms of the public messaging, so Trump doesn't get angry at Russia and start to blame the conflict on Russia, which of course was the instigator of the conflict in the first place.
Right. So we know that Zelensky has said any negotiation involving the surrender of Ukrainian territories is going to be a red line. What are the odds of any progress being made on that front? I mean, Russia does control some territories in Ukraine, including the territory that houses that nuclear power plant, which has come up in discussions lately. The Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has said that Ukraine should expect that they would not see their borders look like they did perhaps back in 2014. But I can see a world where Crimea stays under Russian control, but could we see other parts of Ukraine still under Russian occupation?
Well, Putin's position is not only that the roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory that Russia currently occupies belongs to Russia, but even territory that it never controlled but falls within the borders of certain regions within Ukraine. And he wants not only a de facto recognition of this control, but a legal recognition of it, which Zelensky, of course, has said that they are not going to submit to. So I don't see the room for a compromise here either. The Ukrainian position is these are our territories. They're internationally recognized. Russia, in fact, in the past, in many agreements, recognized these borders, and now they're trying to change them by force. We won't submit to that. And Russia's saying any condition for solving this agreement requires Ukraine to give up these territories. So again, the two sides are very far apart here. We're not close to anything that looks like an end to this war.
And Professor, quickly before we go, I mean, couldn't Zelensky agree to something if he had guarantees from the United States that they would guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty and security? I mean, if Vladimir Putin could be dissuaded from doing this again, that might be a good way to get into these ceasefire negotiations.
Well, I think Zelensky has indicated that he would be willing to not renounce these territories, but accept that they're not regaining them anytime soon in exchange for real, meaningful security guarantees for the 80% of Ukrainian territory that Ukraine controls. So Zelensky is willing to consider that position, but the Russians have always argued that they will not accept a settlement that involves the deployment of any Western troops in Ukraine or any security guarantees such as Ukrainian membership in NATO. So I think that could be the basis for some kind of settlement, but it's not one that Putin has shown any interest in so far.
Really insightful analysis there. Professor Brian Taylor, thank you very much. Great to have you.
Thank you, Vlad.